Narratology and writing long form, creating a story. This is what this lecture is going to cover. We're going to do a very quick recap of putting together an article, particularly for a long form piece. Then we're going to have a look at some of the useful analytical frameworks and scholars whose work we might use to enable us to analyse our own writing, our own articles. So the first thing that we need to establish is this notion of long form. So what is it? Essentially, long form is what it says. It is a form of long writing. So most of the articles that you read within the media are around about 700-ish words long, and that's general sort of article length that you'll find will take up, if it was in a printed magazine, probably an A4 page, and that would be an A4 page, as I say, in a traditional print magazine with 3 columns, perhaps with a banner advert maybe at the top or at the bottom or both, and perhaps at least one image, possibly a text box and so on. So all of that usual furniture that you would see on a magazine page, all of that, and then the text that will flow in those 3 columns will be somewhere around about the 700 word mark. Might be about 650 depending on the advertising and space and the images. So long form is generally anything that's over 1,000 words. Now, long form is something that has become more popular in the British media in recent years, but it's something that traditionally the American media has done very well for decades. So if you go and look at articles in the New Yorker magazine, for example, or Vanity Fair, or any of those sort of big, glossy, well-known magazines, you'll find that an awful lot of them will be long form. And they may be essays that are 3,000 words long. And, you know, those types of pieces, if you want to write long form, they do appear, as I say, or they're increasingly appearing in the British media, but it's something that has been traditionally American, and in order to get a piece of that sort of length published, there needs to be generally quite a lengthy pitching process that involves going back and forth with editors, and quite a lot of the time long form pieces in both American and UK media is quite often done by a staff writer, or somebody will be commissioned to do it. So they're quite hard to get pieces out there that are long form unless you're reasonably well established. You know, it's less likely that new writers will get them, but not unheard of. But the important thing about long form is that it really needs good structure. Because you need to keep the reader with you. And if it's over 3,000 words or over even 1,500 words, you need to keep the reader with you. And that means that you need to break up the wall of text, and you might want to use things like images and text boxes and diagrams and so on. Things that help the reader to actually understand the whole piece that you're writing and to keep them going and keep them just keep them with you and keep them interested. So to recap, and I'm going to go through this very quickly because we've already covered this in earlier lectures. So where do you get those ideas from? You know, and essentially it's everything that is around you. Don't overlook things like keeping a notebook, and always the good ideas come to you when you're in the shower and when you're least expecting it, essentially. So, you know, keep on engaging with the media, keep on reading things, keep on listening to things, keep on talking, watching, and so on. So how do you keep track of all of those ideas? Definitely use whatever form suits you best, but try things out. If you've not tried keeping ideas in an online app, something like Evernote, which is free for the basic one, you know, give that a go, see how that works out. Definitely use ordinary analog old-fashioned notebooks and write things down. You might want to try daily journaling, morning pages, even give speech to text apps a go. And there are quite a few very good ones now on the market that are also free of charge. But definitely keep notes. And the reason why you keep notes is because you might have a brilliant idea now that you can't place. You can't get an article out of it that will fit somewhere. And it could be maybe in a year's time, maybe in 5 years' time, you're actually asked to write something and you suddenly remember, I had a really great idea about this 4 years ago or 5 years ago. Let's have a look back through the notebooks and see if I've got something that's useful. And that's also why daily pages, morning pages quite often helps, because it keeps you writing on a daily basis, and you of course write about anything. And sometimes those ideas don't have legs, they don't appear to be going anywhere at the time, but it could be something that will be useful later on. So never ever throw any of your notes away, which is why sometimes online versions of note taking apps are really a good thing, because you can keep them forever. So instant ideas, and we're going to give this a go in the seminars. Have a look at these and pick one and then write down your idea. So this is a very quick activity, and you just choose one of these and write down a really vague idea. And then you can come back to it. You know, it's all about that generating ideas. And there are lots, again, of lots of different apps and lots of different web pages and games and story ideas and so on that you can use that will help you to keep on generating stuff. And again, it's a skill. It's about just constantly coming up with new stuff. And the more that you do it, the better you get at it. So after you've done that, and you know, all the usual stuff of coming up with the 3 vague ideas, 3 development points from each of those, you choose one, of course, we've done this before, then you go and do your research. And your research is going to break down probably into 2 forms, the online part and the real life part. Now, the online part at the moment is probably the easiest one, but you know, there are lots of different places that you can go to find things out. Never ever overlook the fact that Google gives us, and not just Google, other search engines are available, but you know, that gives us pretty much the whole of human knowledge. So, you know, it's about coming up with a good question for Google. Don't overlook things like Google Scholar. That will help you to find out the academic ideas that maybe underpin some of the things you're looking at. Things like the National Readership Survey will give you the facts and the figures, and there are lots and lots of different companies out there who produce the facts and the figures and spreadsheets and diagrams and graphs and bar charts that will give you all of those statistical bits of info that are perhaps taken from industry. That can be very useful. Don't overlook asking on Twitter or other forms of social media. There may already be Facebook groups or Twitter hashtags that are very widely used that you can go and have a look at, and that will help you to fill in maybe some of the gaps. Reddit is also a great place to find, again, more information and maybe sort of people's points of view. You can also, of course, in real life, ask people. Don't overlook as well emailing academics, maybe some of those people that you found in Google Scholar. There may be other experts who are not within academia, so industry experts, email them, or you know, Google who is the person that knows about this thing. When it's safe to do so, you can perhaps visit the relevant places, and definitely trying something new. You can always get an article out of trying something new. As we saw, as we have seen over the last year or so, there were quite a few articles that came out about how to bake sourdough, for example, and the perfect banana loaf. So, you know, people were getting articles out of things that they were doing that was something new. So when you've done that, the usual thing, write your drafts, write it all down, you know, and the numbered points there are the general process that you'll go through. And again, we've gone through this before, and if you want to recap, do go and have a look at the earlier videos. But you know, that's the basic summary. Write your drafts. And then what is your takeaway? You know, what is that final line, that punchline, if you like? How do you tie together this piece? Is there a call to action in that last line? What is it that you want your reader to take away? Take them to where you want them to go, lead them. So that means providing them with the necessary links. You know, if it's a piece all on, I don't know, how great a particular item is, you know, give them the link of where they can actually find this thing. If it's giving somebody advice, you know, track down the best place that people can go and find out more information. So this might be some of the things that you've already found in your research. You know, if you write a piece about maybe a very strong piece about domestic violence, for example, provide your readers with a link at the end for where they can go and get help and advice. You know, absolutely give them the extra that they need, whether that is where they can buy the thing, where they can experience the thing, especially if these are reviews, but also where they can get more information. And that will then help your article to be a good read. You need to make your readers think. And that's what your last line is all about. You know, what is it that you want them to think about? What is it? What's your call of action? What do you want them to take away from the piece that you've written? So this is very much about knowing what your aim is for the piece that you are writing. You need to grab their attention. So after you've written all of that final piece, you will probably go back and look again at your opening line. Does it tie in with your last line? And, you know, these are also the things that you may be very familiar with writing academic essays. But, you know, write your first line. Grab your reader's attention. And these 5 points here on the right, there's some simple, straightforward and common ways of putting that first line, making it, as it says, strong, provocative, intriguing statement, or maybe there's a little anecdote, maybe you've got some description or scene setting, or maybe it's a question, you know, or maybe you start with a quote. There are other ways, of course, to write that first line, but those are 5 quite useful ones that you might choose one of those to really grab the attention of your reader. Because remember, it's that headline and lead that gets your reader to start reading the piece. So you need to make sure that that really does the job. And those of you who have now had quite a few pieces published on Medium, if you have a look at your stats, and especially if you're now an editor on our Medium publication, go and have a look at all of the stats for this term, and you'll see that those articles that have really attention-grabbing titles are the ones that are getting a high number of views. Now, if that attention-grabbing headline translates into a good opening sentence, that lead, then you've generally got a piece that has the same number or very similar number of reads. If there's a high number of views and a very low number of reads, that means that although that headline was really good, the lead, the first sentence and the first paragraph hasn't really kept the reader there. It wasn't what they were expecting and they've navigated away. So you need to start thinking about how you can make both of those things work for you. So that's how you put together the article. And that's exactly the same for long form as short form, but you know, with long form you need to have more of it. And also as we go through how you can analyse this, that will also help to support the way that you put together a long form piece and any piece. So how can we analyse this? So the critical commentary, this is the second part of your assignment. It's due in May. This asks you specifically to analyse your own writing, and there will be appearing towards the end of term some model answers from students who did very well last year, who have allowed me to share their essays. So you'll be able to have a look at what they wrote and you know, how they put that all together. So, how are we going to analyse it? Well, we can analyse the structure and the narrative, the way that the story has been told, and that's what we're going to have a look at now. So there are many different ways that we can analyse a text. Obviously, this module sits within English language and linguistics, so that's very much the linguistic way is how we're going to do that, and it's broadly speaking stylistics, and there are of course some overlap with things like pragmatics. So each of these on the right hand side we could use, and we're going to go through all of these: that focalization, temporality, narrative structure, diegesis and mimesis, whether we're going to use a triadic or dyadic sign, and rhetorical figures. Now, if you're looking at all of this, and particularly if you took this as a wild module and you're not an English language and linguistics student, or you've not done any stylistics modules yet, you may be looking at that and thinking, I have no idea what she's talking about. Don't worry, we're going to explain, or I'm going to explain it. Okay, so this idea of focalization that's in that slide at the top, and temporality, those are both ideas from Gerard Genette. And if you follow that link there, you will find that there's a great deal about Gerard Genette, and in fact you can actually go and Google Genette, and he wrote a particularly famous book that deals mainly with the writings of Marcel Proust, from In Search of Lost Time, but the ideas that Genette came up with about how you analyse a piece of text has continued to be used. And even though Proust's book or works, because it's very long, In Search of Lost Time, is actually supposedly sort of autobiographical, semi-autobiographical, sort of fictional. It's can be used, the same narratology that Genette uses can be used in any piece of writing, pretty much, fiction or non-fiction. You might also want to look at David Herman's work. So his basic elements of narrative is where each of these quotes are taken from. But there's also, David Herman also wrote another useful book called Story Logic, where he goes through, again, all of these different details. But for Herman, there are basically 4 different aspects that we can look at when we're analysing a piece of writing. So that situatedness. So this is essentially the context. So why have we got this article? Why is there this piece all about food in a sports magazine, for example? And of course, that would be, at first, we might think, well, that doesn't really make sense. But then if maybe we read the article, we realise that it's actually about nutritional benefits for athletes, for example. And that's the reason for telling that specific discourse context. Very similar to the way that, if we're all sitting around a campfire, somebody may well begin telling ghost stories, because it's that context, it's that situation. So that's something to think about with your own writing. What was the context of the piece? Why did you write this? What was your aim? How does it fit in with the cultural context of the world at the moment, if it does? Then we might think about event sequencing. So this is about the order of events, so that narrative, and it's very much a case of when we tell a particular narrative, if you think about jokes, for example, we tell things in a specific order, and the interpreter, the listener, or the reader will actually have worked out, because of the way the narrative is put together, if it's a joke, they will have worked out that they're going to get a punchline, for example. So, this is where very sort of stylized jokes, for example, where you have something like, 2 pieces of string walk into a bar. and one of them ties himself up and then ruffles up his head, and the barman says, "Are you a piece of string?" And he says, "Afraid not." So, we know what we're going to get. We know that as soon as somebody says, two people walk into a bar, you're going to get a joke. It's that sort of thing. So we have specific sequences, specific structures that we know what will happen next. We know that there's going to be a beginning, a middle, and an end, and so on. So, if we have a non-fiction story that's perhaps telling us about how an awful event had unfolded, we will generally have at the end some sort of resolution, good or bad, but there will be some sort of resolution. So again, it's about that knowledge that the reader already brings with them, that this is a particular structure, and we can look at that structure in anybody's writing. And then the next one, world making or world disruption. So this is something that we're very familiar with, particularly with fiction, but also with non-fiction as well, because when we have a piece that tells us about maybe somewhere that we don't really know, or an experience that we're not familiar with, you will get world making going on. So this means that the writer will be setting up within this text, they will be setting up how this world works. And an awful lot of these elements we are very familiar with, and we don't really notice them when we're reading them. So, we already fill in the gaps. We already know if somebody writes about a restaurant, for example, you have some world making going on. There will be a description of what the restaurant looks like. And we will be expecting, a bit like the event sequencing, we will be expecting things to match up to our existing schemas, our existing frameworks from our memories and our previous experiences of what a restaurant, for example, will be like. And we will already have sort of maybe imagined what this place looks like and how things operate in it. And if sometimes there is something that then doesn't match, that world is disrupted, then that can perhaps be where the whole of the article or the story, that can be where it all hangs, is on that world disruption, something that happens that you wouldn't expect. So that can also be very useful to look at. Excuse me. And then the last element that David Herman looks at is this notion of qualia. And he calls it raw feels. So this will be an emotional response that you have to a piece. And it could be that the piece makes you feel very upset, or the piece maybe makes you feel moved. And, there is something else going on that, as I say, makes you, brings about that call to action. You feel maybe so angered by the piece that you want to get involved, or to do something about what you've just read. Or maybe it makes you laugh. Maybe that was the aim, that the writer, the author, wanted you to have a joyful experience that would make you laugh. So how can we identify what were the elements of qualia? What was it that really made you laugh? Why did it make you laugh? And that, of course, will be tied into the world making or world disruption, and the event sequencing, and the situatedness. So, all of these four elements are absolutely tied into one another, but can be really useful for analysing a piece that you've written, or analysing pieces that other people have written. So, as well as analysing structure, we can also analyse characters and common events. And we can look to other theorists for this. Some of you may well be familiar with Vladimir Prop's work on the morphology of the folk tale. So he analysed a large number of Russian folk tales back in the 20s, and that's a photograph of him there. He isolated various different elements that came up again and again, which is why it's a morphology. And these different elements are then put together in a bit like building blocks. If you have a load of Lego building blocks, they're all the same sort of blocks. you know, different sizes and so on, and different colours and so on. So they have different properties, but you can put them together and build a wall or whatever. And you know, that's very much like props morphology of the folktale. All of these different elements can be moved around, different ones can be used, and you know, you will end up with a folktale, and these elements are common across all folktales, whether they're Russian or not. Christopher Brooker also came up with something very similar. With this 7 basic plots, where he was looking not at the different elements that are within the stories, but how stories are all one of 7 basic plots. And yes, of course, those plots are necessarily extremely generic, but we can see those 7 basic plots being used again and again, even in non-fiction. If you read a story about somebody who has won a lottery, you know, had a big lottery win, it will probably follow the same sort of outline as Cinderella, because that's a rags to riches plot, which is one of the 7 basic plots. And, you know, there are lots of those types of stories around. As I say, Cinderella, also the lottery winner. And journalists will quite often be selective about the elements that they include in that article to ensure that it actually fits that basic rags to riches format. And then the last one there, although there are plenty of others out there that you can look at, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, which was Joseph Campbell. And he takes more of an anthropologist point of view with this, and he looks at how, a bit like Prop, but how all of these stories that we have out there, whether they are stories from various different faiths or folk tales, myths, legends, stories that human beings tell, they are constantly reusing the same elements, which is why the title is A Hero with a Thousand Faces. So, you know, it's the same basic character. And, you know, they go through various different problems, which again sort of matches with what Christopher Brooker says, and also with Prop's morphology of the folktale. So this is something that we use again and again, and no doubt, you know, aligns to human brain architecture and how we make sense of the world. Okay, I'm going to take a break there, and we will come back to the next video where we will be looking specifically at how you can break down your analysis. So yeah, take a break before the next video.